Hey, g'day guys, it's Adam from VideoShowMeHow, and I am pumped to bring you this special two-part series on how to do Cape York. This was helped made possible by the amazing support from 230 Australia and Outback Equipment, and of course, the continued support from the VideoShowMeHow patrons. You guys are all a bunch of legends. Now, all of this content and everything you're going to see in these two parts was filmed during the VideoShowMeHow Cape trip, which took place in June, July of 2023. And I did do a daily vlog of the whole trip as well. So if you're keen to kind of follow along and see all the trials and tribulations play out along the way, we did do it all the way from Brisbane all the way to the tip. Head on back to the VideoShowMeHow YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel, of course, if you haven't already, and you can follow along in all of those videos. Now, in these two videos, part one that you're watching now, we're going to be going through all of the main sort of topics and go into those in a bit of detail. I've reached out to a whole bunch of different people before the trip, after the trip. I've sort of grabbed all of the comments and questions that I've been getting from all the subscribers and on the socials and all that sort of stuff, and tried to sort of compile and congeal all of that into some main headline topics that I'll go through in this video. Video 2 is going to be a live follow along of the itinerary that we used, and you can get that itinerary at my website. So head over to VideoShowMeHow.com and I'll have a copy of the exact itinerary we used if you want to use that as a baseline for your trip. So without further ado, let's get started. So food and water. Now this one, of course, is going to be subjective and dependent on how long you're going to take. A couple of top tips that I picked up along the way is really going to depend on whether you're going to be cooking all of your meals, whether you're looking to buy and support the local roadhouses along the way, and then how you kind of like to cook and what you like to cook. One of the things I found is the roadhouses had some pretty darn good food. So we found we had a whole bunch of food left over because we planned to cook all of our meals every single step of the way. So I definitely say in your trip, make a bit of a decision early on, are you going to be eating at the roadhouses when you're stopping there, if you are stopping at the roadhouses, because that's going to save you taking a whole bunch and buying a whole bunch of food that you may not necessarily need. The other part of this is I would consider the size of the fridge you took. If you have a look at the trip unpack video that I have already done on the YouTube channel, you can check it out. I'll link it down below. I talk about that in our main fridge. I took a big dual zone sort of fridge, and I probably could have got away with a smaller one because we had a whole bunch of gear in there that we didn't necessarily need in the end. So just have a bit of a think about when you're doing your itinerary, have a bit of a think about, well, where are we? And is there food available there that we're going to purchase? If you totally want to go off grid and you not necessarily want to go anywhere near any of the other crowds or anything like that, or you maybe are on a bit more of a budget and you're keen to just DIY, then that's something to take into consideration there as well. Now, the types of food, I wanted something quick and easy, and that's something to definitely consider. I do love a bit of a cook up when I go to camp, like I'm sure most of you guys do. Something to consider is you're going to be doing some long distances. So if you've got visions of cooking up the old Gordon Ramsay specials every night, maybe take a bit of a pause and have a think about that, because probably you're going to be a bit knackered, and the last thing you're going to want to do is get out a whole bunch of extra equipment that you have to carry as well to pull together an amazing gourmet meal at the end of the day. So that's definitely a consideration that you're going to be wanting to think about, is simple is best. Now, from a water perspective, particularly drinking water perspective we're talking about here, you're definitely going to want to have some on board. It's not going through the center of Australia, through the desert or anything like that though. What I found when I was researching my trip, I found there was a little bit of misinformation around the scarcity of water, and I found it to be the total opposite. Most of the roadhouses had fresh drinking water that you were able to use and fill up, so I could top off the tanks. You can see in the before and after Cape trip video, I had a 40-litre water tank that I took, and that was more than enough for all of our drinking water. Of course, if you're having showers every night and blasting through water like you're at home, that's a bit of a different story. You don't want to be doing that. You definitely want to have that conserved mindset in play, but water isn't necessarily something you're going to be struggling to find. So comms. Now, this is going to depend on where you're going as well, I guess, as far as are you going full hardcore, no people anywhere for the full trip to the top, or you're going to be around some of the roadhouses. As of when we went on our trip, as soon as you got near a roadhouse, we picked up some signal. Now, we had mainly Telstra-based phones. You can go online and get a black spot map for your local provider. You'll generally find it's Telstra only, and it's only really in the couple of K radius around each of the roadhouses. Don't think you're going to be blasting Netflix the whole way for the kids in the back. That's definitely not going to be the case. You're going to want to load them up with all sorts of pre-downloaded stuff, but you will have at least talking signal at each of the roadhouses. Now, in between on the PDR, it's going to be few and far between. You're really not going to be picking up much in the way of reception. So that's something to consider because sections of this are remote. Generally, if you have a breakdown or some sort of a failure on the PDR, there will be someone else coming along if you are going in that overall sort of peakish season. I definitely recommend having some sort of device though to be able to call for help. And that could be in the way of a sat phone. You don't have to go out and buy those. If you do a bit of a quick Google, there are a lot of places in Cairns in particular that rent them out. What we ended up doing is taking a Starlink. Now I know that's probably a little bit extreme and not everyone really needs that. I do this little thing called VideoShowMeHow and I needed to be able to back up some footage and I used it for that. But that was also our sort of emergency comms so that if I needed to reach out to someone using the internet, the space internets, we were able to do that and set that up pretty much anywhere. Now from a gear perspective, we're not going to go into tons of detail in this particular video because there's already two comprehensive ones that are on the Video Show Me How YouTube channel right now. Before we went on the trip, I did a big video on everything that I was taking on the trip, and then like literally the second day after I got back, after having a bit of a rest, I did a second video on pulling all the gear back out and talking through what worked, what didn't, what I'd take and what I wouldn't. The main thing I'd say about gear is really think about how you're going to be camping, what's all the stuff that you'd normally take to be comfortable, but really consider with everything you're putting in, do I really need this? Am I really going to use it? Because if you're not, or you think you're only going to use it once or something, you're probably better off leaving it at home. If I was doing the trip again, I would definitely take less. I needed to take a bunch of stuff for the filming and everything for this particular video and part 2, but I'd definitely consider removing some of the stuff that I did take, and I talk about that in the main 2 gear videos that are on the channel. Now, it's a similar story when it comes to vehicle prep, and once again, there are 2 videos similar to the gear that are on the channel right now. I do a bit of a walk around of all of the gear that is on the vehicle itself and some of the stuff that I recommend you should take and some of the stuff that I installed specifically for the Cape on the D-Max. And then similarly, when I got back, I did a full walk around and talk through each of the different components, what I thought was absolutely a godsend that I did take, and some of the things that you could probably do without. I think the main thing to remember when it comes to your vehicle, the PDR can be quite punishing. Corrugations are real and they are brutal. For me personally, the big things are I would not be going with a set of highway terrain tires that came with your 4-wheel drive. I definitely go to some sort of all-terrain tire that's going to give you a lot more toughness in the sidewalls and be able to withstand that harsh environment a lot better than any of the highway terrains that come with any modern 4-wheel drive. Suspension-wise, it really depends on whether you're going to be doing the Old Tele Track or not. You are going to be pounding that thing and giving it a good workout. The suspension that comes on most modern 4-wheel drives will be sufficient for the PDR if you are driving sensibly. If you can though, upgrading to some heavier duty suspension for a trip like that is only going to be a good thing. It's going to make the ride more comfortable and certainly going to help the car withstand some of the punishment, particularly on those corrugations. We go into a ton more detail on what you need and what you don't in that vehicle prep video on the YouTube channel. Now this is a big one, and that is fuel, because you're not going to get there without it, so it's definitely worth having a bit of a think about how this is going to work for you. We took off from Brisbane and getting to Cairns, it's BAU. It's bitumen the whole way, obviously. It's M1, you're going to get there. There's nothing really crazy to stress about. You'll see in that gear video on the channel, we did take a full spare jerry can for the D-Max. We ended up not using it. I sort of got all the way to the top, ended up putting it in because we were fine. We got fuel at each of the roadhouses. And that's something to bear in mind. Each of the roadhouses will have fuel. Now, from a fuel economy perspective, I definitely recommend you pack up your rig and go for a one-night trip before you do the Cape trip and do an actual fuel economy measurement of that trip and use that as your baseline. So load up with everything you're going to take, tow the camper or the van if you're taking one of those, or at least have all the gear that you're planning on take so you're the similar sort of weight, and then get a proper readout. For the D-Max, as you saw in all of the videos there for the Cape, we averaged about 14 litres per 100. I based it on more than that. I based it, my range and what have you, at 20, which was wildly more than I knew I was going to use, and I based that on cost as well. You can go ahead and for the time you're going, you can just get on the Google and you can Google the actual roadhouses and it will tell you how much the fuel is. The most we saw was close to that $3 mark, which was pretty wild, but at the end of the day, they're carting it a long way. I calculated the fuel usage we would need for the whole distance I'd add about that $3 per litre mark, and I used that for all of my calculations, so I had no ballpark how much I was going to be up for. And when it comes to when are you going to do Cape York, there's a bit of a rule of thumb, and that's very much dependent on the season. It is subject to the wet and dry season up there, so it is worth bearing in mind the school holiday period. If you're not a big fan of more people on the road, then try and avoid those periods where you can. We pretty much did it smack bang in that school holiday period, certainly for the first half of it, and we found that, yeah, while there was some extra people around, it wasn't too crazy. It's not like all the campsites were completely overflowing or anything like that. Now, of course, the time of year is going to impact the temperature as well. When we went, it was sort of towards the top end of the 20s, sort of 29, 30 degrees most of the time. We got rain almost every day, just a bit of a sprinkle here and there, which was cool, keep the dust down. The further you go into the season, the temps are going to go up further, and that's something to bear in mind as well. If you are based down south, it's going to be a ton more humid than what you're used to, so you just got to prepare accordingly. Overall, if there's a best quote-unquote time to do the Cape, I think anywhere from June to August is going to be your best bet. And like we said earlier, generally the earlier you go in the season, the less that road's been traveled, so there's going to be less corrugations and less dust. The further into the season you go, the hotter it's going to get, the drier it's going to get, so there's going to be more dust kicking around, there's going to be more traffic, so there's going to be more corrugations. If you are going to do the Old Teletrack, like you'll see in part 2 of this video, water is a factor. You're not going to get around a whole bunch of different river crossings and creek crossings there, and if you go really early in the season, those creeks are going to be full. They're going to be pretty high, and in some of those crossings is going to be pretty hairy, so that's something to bear in mind as well. The later in the season you go, the more water's coming out of those systems, so things like Nolan's Brook isn't going to be over the bonnet. It's going to be a little bit drier and a little bit easier to do. Now, when it comes to how long do I need to do the Cape, in my opinion, I think it's two things really. It's, are you going to do the Old Teletrack, and do you want to take your time to see all the things, or do you just want to really get to the top and then motor straight back down? If you want to go straight up and straight back down and not really stop, not do the Old Telly, and you just want to get to that sign, you could theoretically do it in a week. We got from all the way to the top to Brisbane in 3 days. If you want to do some big days and some big Ks, sort of doing 1,000 Ks a day type stuff, technically you could do it in a week. That's not something I'd recommend. I'd definitely recommend taking it as long as you can. We went for about 3.5 weeks in total, and of course we were doing a bunch of filming and all sorts of other stuff, but we had plenty of time to kick back. If you're doing the Old Teletrack, there is some awesome places that you can go and visit, like you'll see in part 2 of this video. The Twin Falls and all of those different waterfalls are just amazing, and you're blown away that you're in the middle of this sort of dusty, sort of red dirt track down the middle of nowhere, and then you get to this campsite and there's just a little slice of heaven that you can go swimming in. It's just wild. So it really depends if you're going to be stopping at all those places, and I'd highly recommend you do. So if you would hold me to a number, I'd suggest going for at least 3 weeks. You could probably do it in 2, a week up and a week back, but if you can stretch it to 3, that's going to be ideal. Now, when it comes to mapping, there's a couple of things I'd recommend. You definitely want to go and grab yourself just some paper maps. They're super cheap. You can get it from HEMA and a bunch of other places. Just have them handy with you so you can pull those out. If you get a bit off track or anything like that, you can get a bit of a feel for where you are. Don't underestimate the power of your phone. You got GPS in everything these days. Download a couple of good little apps and have them handy. Even the old Google Maps. We used a couple of different pieces of software. I'll link them down below. And they all had that offline mapping capability. So before I went, I made sure I downloaded each of those. Definitely have that sort of stuff sitting on your phone, or maybe your partner's phone as well. So you got a little bit of redundancy. With a couple of little turn-offs on the PDR, you obviously want to make sure you go to the right way, because it might be a little while, a few hundred Ks before you have another turn-off. So you want to have some sort of navigation. The PDR is a single road most of the way, so it's not like you're going to need to refer to it a ton. But when you get to those turn-offs, you really want to know where you are so you go that right way. So definitely have something pre-downloaded, have that map and your route all drawn out on that paper map, so you've got a backup and you'll be good as gold. And then finally, planning and itinerary. Now, if that's not your jam, that's okay. Head on over to the website, VideoShowMeHow.com, steal mine. I've got it sitting on there, ready to rock and roll, sitting there with we've got leaving, arriving, it's everything we used. How many Ks there were between the two distances, how long it sort of took, whether there was fuel available there. I even have some notes there around how much the fuel was at the time. So feel free to grab mine, download that and use it as a base or as something for your trip. Just change the dates and that sort of stuff. Definitely recommend at least having a bit of a ballpark on where you are, where you're going, and then that sort of little bit of research into average fuel costs so you can work out how much everything's going to cost you and roughly what sort of distances you're going to do, so you can kind of prep for what fuel you need, what food do I need, when am I going to be eating, is there food available, all of that sort of stuff we've just talked about. And that brings us on to part 2 of this video, which is seeing what all this looks like. It's taking the itinerary that's on the website and playing it out in real life. You'll get to see every little bit, every single day along the way of how all that worked. We'll stop at all the roadhouses, houses. We're going down all the tracks. You'll see what the roads are like, how much dust there, what the corrugations are like. We do the Old Telly track, so you get to see every crossing on the Old Telly, how gnarly they all are, what the D-Max went like, all of the bits and pieces, how much water was in Nolan's, all of that good stuff. I'm pleased to report, if you've been following along, you already know, but I'm pleased to report the old D-Max, it went over stuff and through stuff and up stuff that it had absolutely no right in doing, and it didn't break a sweat. So I'm super pumped about that, and you get to see the lot. You get to see everything from Cairns all the way up to walking up and up and over. Turns out there's a big little hill that you got to walk over to that little sign that everyone takes a photo at, and you'll get to see the lot. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit that little button and ring the little bell, so the second the part 2 of this comes out, which is out very, very soon, if not already by the time you're watching this, you'll be able to see that when it is out and live on the channel. Big thanks again to 230 Australia and Outback Equipment for helping make this possible, and of course the continued support from my legendary Video Show Me How patrons. You guys are a bunch of legends. So I'll see you in part 2. As always, I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.